Hello, everyone. Welcome to Raakvat Rugby on Megafoon Sports. My privilege to welcome David O'Sullivan, the author of the book Rassie, on our channel here. Hello, David.
Very good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. I'm fascinated to get to know the story behind what happened with Rassie. Firstly, I wanted to know, tell us a bit about David O'Sullivan. Why are we talking to you? What's your background? How you ended up writing the book for Rassie on his behalf? Because it's not an autobiography, but it was his book effectively. Am I right?
Yeah, it's his book. I'm known as the ghostwriter, except the traditional ghostwriter doesn't have his name on the book. His fingerprints don't appear anywhere on the book. My name's actually on the book, on the spine, and my photograph's on the back. So there's no hiding away from the fact that I was involved. And I don't think anybody who thinks they know Rassie, has seen Rassie on TV, watched his games, will think that he is a literary man and would have written the book himself. First thing is, where would he have found the time? Because we wrote this leading up to the 2023 World Cup. So there's no pretense that Rassie actually wrote the book. But my own background is that I've been a journalist for 42 years, probably just a little bit more than that, primarily on radio and television. I had a brief spell of 4 years where I was actually a lawyer, a media lawyer. So I never really exited the media game, but the biggest things I did was I worked for 702 for 20 years, and I worked for the SABC. I presented a rugby show on SABC for 12 years, I think it was. Well, I presented a lot of sport. I've done lots of writing. I wrote for a while for SA Rugby magazine, while I was on the radio, while I was doing TV. You know what it's like. We have all these side gigs, side hustles. And then I was doing the breakfast show on Kaya FM, big radio station in Johannesburg. I did that for 4 years. And it was as if I hit the wall. We came out of COVID. And I had been on the radio for 40 years of my life. And I decided it was now enough. I just fell out of love with radio. It didn't have the same appeal to me anymore, nor did journalism. I was fully invested and fully involved and loved it and did many, many things and had incredible adventures. But there came a time where it didn't mean anything to me anymore, and I needed to pass the baton to the younger generation. And lo and behold, the opportunity came from Pan Macmillan, the publishers, who said they had been negotiating with Rassie and his lawyer, Rassie Erasmus, no relation, for about a year to get a book done. And finally, they'd got an agreement. They submitted a list of names of people. Mine was on that list, and Rassie went, I'll take that guy. He later told me that he didn't want somebody who was part of the rugby writing fraternity. He wanted somebody who had a little bit of distance. He knew about me, knew of me. And so when we met for the very first time, which was January last year at the Grendel wine farm outside Durbanville, we sat down for what was supposed to be an hour conversation, just getting to know each other. I was down there doing a corporate gig, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. And one of the things I said to him is, we are complete strangers, but when we, at the end of this process, should it work out, we will know each other incredibly well, and you and I have to trust one another. And he went, yeah, okay. And then we went from there. It was the easiest process of the lot. We didn't have to tread around each other to feel each other out or anything like that. We just got on with the gig. So that, in a nutshell, is me and how I got the gig.
The interesting thing that you mentioned there, that the fact that he said he doesn't really know you that well, and you wouldn't know him that well. Because, you know, in the rugby fraternity, you always bump into the same people, into the same faces. People start getting a bit jaded, and they've got a lot of preconceptions. I can understand the reason why he chose you. The question I want to ask you is, what was the thinking behind this book? Why did Rassie want to have this book written? What was the idea behind it?
It was the very first question I asked him, because I think for anything in broadcasting or any kind of engagement, you have to say, who's the audience? And in asking that question, often it's answered by also saying, what do you want to achieve by this? And so the audience was people who thought they knew Rassie, was his feeling about it. So it was the general rugby public, but we also felt that there was a wider audience. There were people who are starting to get interested in rugby, who might not necessarily care about the minutiae of, say, the Lions series back in 1997 that he played in, but would want to know something more about who is Rassie, what makes him tick. What I wanted to know is, how did a boy from Dispatch get transformation right? Because it just seemed to me that everything was working against him in terms of his upbringing and the people around him when he was a kid. He, though, when I said, why do you want to write a book? Because he's not a books man. He doesn't come from a world of books. He admitted to me right at the start that he had only ever read one book in his life, and that was Lord of the Flies, a set work when he was at school. And up until reading his own book, that was the only book he had ever read. I actually, at that stage, didn't believe him. And after working with him for so long, I realized it was actually the case. But his main thing was to say that people misunderstood him. They thought he was one type of person, but he isn't. And that didn't make any sense to me until we'd really finished the book and I'd got to know him. And I realized then what he was talking about. And what it is that most people like me, you go into these situations believing or perceiving of Rassie as this gregarious, outgoing, fun-loving, extroverted, sociable person. And he's not that. He's a very shy, introverted, quiet, calm person. But he does incredibly well a thing called masking, where he is able to understand what is expected of him in society when he's public facing, and he can adopt that persona. He can turn it on and turn it off. It is also incredibly exhausting, both physically and emotionally, to do that kind of thing. But that's what Rassie is about. He said to me, "I've very few friends," and I thought he meant, well, his definition of friends is different to mine, possibly, that he's got a big social circle, but he doesn't count them as true friends. But only later I realized it was actually the case. He doesn't have a great big number of mates because he doesn't seek that kind of social interaction and social activity. And so as I got to know him, I understood him to be this person who much prefers to be by himself or in a very, very small group of like-minded people. And he hyper-focuses on rugby. That is what he's about. If we were working on the book, he would hyper-focus on the book. Working on rugby, we'd hyper-focus on the rugby. So all his attention is on the thing that is important to him at that time. And he wanted to correct this perception of him being this gregarious, fun-loving kind of guy. And so the first 2 pages of the book actually address that issue. And one of the lines that we had in the book, I remember writing the line, I said, I'm uncomfortable doing news conferences, but the more I've done them, the better I am at them. And he listened to that line. He said, "No, Chom, change that. That's wrong." And I thought, oh, I've actually misunderstood all of this. And he said, "No, put there, I get nervous. I get nervous during doing news conferences." So instead of saying, "No, news conferences are pretty easy for me," he actually wanted to strengthen the perception that I was writing in there, that it's not just discomfort, it's nerves. So when you see Rassie doing news conferences, doesn't he look like the most relaxed guy going? He's always got a smile on his face. He seems happy. That's called masking. He's able to adopt that persona, but it's tiring for him to do it, and he prefers not to do it. But because of his hyper focus, he knows it's important to do it.
I said to you in the beginning, I wanted to talk to you about two aspects of Rassie. One is Rassie the person, and one is Rassie the coach. You addressed a lot of the issues about Rassie the person, but the perception's still out there, and you see it a lot on social media, especially of overseas rugby fans and the likes, and even in some of the World Rugby, hallways and the likes, is that Rassie is perceived as both an arrogant person and an arrogant coach. I'll talk about the video that he said out in the comments he made about the referees and the likes. Is that, you just said he's actually a shy person? Is the arrogance part of that masking? Is that what he's projecting? Yeah. So he comes across as more confident, or what is that?
Yes, I would say so. I don't want to be some kind of amateur psychiatrist or psychologist or human behaviorist, but my interactions with Rassie were very genuine, and we sat for hours upon hours upon hours, day after day after day, talking. My methodology for doing the book was to put a lapel microphone on him and on me and then record. And so we weren't in any way deviating from just a pure conversation. I didn't have to say, just hold on a second, let me just write that down. Or did you mean this? Did you mean that? Whatever. It was, we could just talk. And then he would, again, hyper focus. He was just so involved. So we would do that. We'd set the day apart for that. And that would be 8 hours. And then he would want to do it for 8 hours. I would say, come, Russ, let's take a break for lunch. He'd go, no, keep going. There would be the odd toilet break, and that would be it. But we just carried on and on. And so I felt that I saw the genuine side of Rassie. He wasn't trying to impress me or adopt a persona. But when I see him outside of that kind of relationship, which I perceive to be the normal one, I see the extent to which he turns it on, because it's important in that environment. He can't just be the quiet, normal, conversational person that he was with me. He's got to be the coach. And I would imagine that if people perceive him as arrogance, it is because that's the way you behave in those environments. Also, just to go back on the issue of the hyper focus, Rassie is very bloody minded about what he wants to achieve. And if people aren't going to understand his way, I would imagine that he's going to then raise his game and be a bit more forceful. And if it's perceived as arrogant and aggressive, so be it on for the other coaches and players if they've been on the receiving end.
What are the cost of any type of hyper focus? Is your focus is at the expense of some other things? And in Rassie's case, it looks like his marriage is the one that that he had to sacrifice. That came out recently. His father used to be an alcoholic. That played a big role in terms of his personality development, and he's actually quite ill as well. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes. Now the issue with his wife, and he was going through tough times while we were writing the book, but that part of his life he didn't bring into the book. The role that his wife played in various stages of his life. She's a qualified nurse. In fact, she's a highly qualified person in the medical field. She was actually a matron of one of the top hospitals in Bloemfontein. And she used to nurse him. She played a big role in the whole move to Ireland, coming back again. So her name, she's very much in the story. But I had to remind him that we needed to put his wedding into the story. And quite clearly, he just absolutely adores his children, because even when we were working together, he would find time if he would try and get his trips to coincide with a netball tour by one of his twins. And so he came up because she was playing at Tuckey's University. His daughters were at Stellenbosch and still are. And so he would coordinate so that he could be with them, with his daughter, watching her play netball. So he's very close in that regard. It's sad that the marriage did break down, but they were married for over 20 years. And I can't imagine that Rassie, with his hyper focus on rugby and missing on the weekends, would have been that conducive to a, well, I shouldn't. I don't know. It must have been tough for both of them, I would imagine. Just on the illness, that I think is quite a surprise to a lot of people. It was reported but underreported that he was battling with an illness during the 2019 World Cup. And we addressed it in a lot of detail in the book. He was initially a little reluctant to put as much in, but I felt it was important. And so in typical Rassie style, if he's in 100%. And so he gave me a lot of information about the illness. In fact, it was something that he spoke to me about right at the very beginning because of the side effects of the medication. And one of the side effects is one of the drugs he was taking is a diuretic. So he needed to pee a lot, and he would he'd always go, okay, Chom, just got to go to the toilet. So that gave me the respite to save the audio files and things like that. But he downplays it a lot. And it's amazing when I researched this disease known as Wagner's disease. Now, it's got a much longer name, which is the more politically correct name, because the doctor who discovered this disease, Wegner, he's got some Nazi affiliations. And so they went, oh, well, it's politically not correct. But you know what? For everybody knows it as Wegner's disease. What it does, in Rassie's case, is it causes a constriction of his throat. So as he explained to me, he's got the esophagus of a 10-year-old boy. And if in the 1970s, Wegner's disease, it affects you in different places. It just so happens it affects him in his throat. And if it was the 1970s, he would be dead. There was no cure for Wegner's disease. Now the medication is so sophisticated, the prognosis is a long life. But it just goes to show how serious this actually is. And the fact that he's managed this with the medication that causes side effects such as cortisone, in which he is seen to become rather puffy. Then people think he's put on weight, that he's eating too much, and he's walking down the street and they go, hey, vetgat, you should be training more with your boys. And people are just downright rude to him about it. And it's a source of great discomfort, both emotionally and physically for him. But he manages it and he's got used to it. He knows what to do. So he comes with those kind of difficulties. The other part you mentioned, Enver, was the alcoholic father. And I felt that was, for me, such a critical story to talk about. And so the beginning of the book talks about this family life, which only when I stepped back from it and thought, okay, now let me try and assess this family life, what you've got is a loving family, a mom and two sisters who just adored their little brother, and a little boy who adored his sisters and his mom, and neighbors who were just so comforting and acted as a second family. The Humans, Puerto Humans family, lived next door, and he was forever in at their house, and they would, one of the Human boys, there was a big clan of them, they would walk him to school, and his love of rugby, his understanding of rugby, and his toughness came from the Human family. But sadly, he's then got the dark side of this alcoholic father who wasn't an alcoholic while his sisters were growing up. So for them, I think it has been that much more traumatic. It was the father that he knew, that Abel Erasmus was the drunk. And in a little place like Dispatch, where Abel Erasmus was actually an incredibly talented musician. He worked for the Department of Home Affairs or Bantu administration prior to that. But he was this musician, and he would play in the local social gatherings. So everybody knew Abel Erasmus, but they also sadly knew him as the drunk. And it was an embarrassment and a humiliation for Rassie, for his sisters, for the family. And the bizarre stories that Rassie tells about his father at one stage coming after him with a gun, because he wanted Rassie as a 12-year-old to drive the car to take him to his parents' house, to Rassie's grandparents' house. It's an absolutely bizarre story on many levels. And not only is it a father chasing a son with a gun, and he has to go and hide on the neighbor's roof, but it's also a story of a 12-year-old boy who learned how to drive a car because his father was otherwise too drunk to drive and wouldn't let any of the women drive. So he drove the car in this incredibly mad world. But it was that I think is this is the seed of Rassie's transformation journey, because later he sees transformation going wrong, and seeing humiliation and embarrassment in the people who are affected by it, and understanding his own absolute revulsion of it and aversion to embarrassment, any form of embarrassment. He said there's got to be a better way, and that then took him on his journey for transformation. So those things that you've itemized right at the beginning are fundamental to understanding the character of Rassie.
I want to just jump ahead while you mentioned the word transformation now, because Rassie has been seen as sort of the almost, I want to call it, savior of transformation in rugby, in the sense that he moved away from quotas, he moved away from putting players in a team just simply because of the color of their skin. And like you just said, they felt embarrassed to be chosen and be seen as quota players. And he realized that, and he made a plan of that. And he managed to unite an entire country behind him and his team, for 2 World Cups in a row now. And he's almost seen as a sort of messiah. And then last week, SA Rugby, they never made this public. Rapport newspaper leaked it. But the internal documents said that none of the teams, especially the senior rugby team, the Springbok team, are really in compliance with the target that they're setting for themselves. Does that not set back all the hard work that Rassie's been doing, all the goodwill that he's generated over the last how many years and the likes? Is that not SA Rugby shooting themselves in the foot again by being too politically correct, or is it just a step in a journey? Because my discussion last week with the editor of Rapport was perhaps they know that they're thinking about ending up somewhere in 2030 around there, but they know it's not realistic. And this is not where rugby wants to be or is at the moment. Do you think that is a step backwards, or is it just another step towards a better solution? Maybe it's a long question. Sorry for that.
No, absolutely. I think it's well phrased. I think it's always going to be the bumpiest of roads. But the fact is, we're actually on a road where previously we were just wandering in the veldt, and now there is actually a road. And I don't think there's going to be a perfect solution. I'll give you an answer that I was quite impressed by. So I was at the Franschhoek Literary Festival in the middle of May, where I was doing a thing on a talk about the Rassie book, about transformation. They wanted that to be the theme, and because Rassie doesn't like doing these kinds of things, there was no suggestion that he would come along and explain it. But I knew from talking to him the way he thought about these things, and I thought the best thing to do is to bring a person who had experienced transformation to the party. And it was a very good mate of mine, somebody I think you will know by name and reputation if you haven't met him personally. His name is Khaya Molotana. He was the first. Now, I don't want to get caught up in the nomenclature here, but he's the first Black African. And somebody will then challenge me and say, but then the colored people are Black Africans. And then I'll go, well, the ethnic African. And then some people say, well, my grandfather's great-grandfather, we were all born here, so we're white and we're also African. So then I have to say, well, he comes from a rural Eastern Cape village whose home language is Xhosa, and he played for the Springboks, and he was the first of his ilk to do that. Maybe that's what, but I think you understand what I'm talking about. He, for me, first Black African to play for the Springboks. That was in 1999. He was at the Cats at the time of Laurie Mains. And so Khaya has experienced the best and the worst of transformation. And he understands it far more deeply and personally than most. So I got him to come along. He and I used to host the TV show together, Rugazone, on SABC, and he's remained my good mate. He's now a SuperSport commentator and a coach. And he was asked that exact question based on the Report and City Press article. Has transformation actually failed? And here was his answer, Mvia. He said, pure transformation, successful transformation of rugby will have occurred when 15 white players play for the Springboks and nobody bats an eyelid, when every Black person in the country identifies with that team. That's when transformation has occurred. So in essence, if we spell that out, it's not a case of sitting with your team and counting. How many Black players are there? How many white players are there? How many colored players? You don't do that anymore. You say, what is now a team that all people can identify with? And then it's not a rugby team that's transformed, a Springbok rugby team that's transformed. It's sport as a whole has transformed, that people don't care if it's white or black. They just care that it's that team in those jerseys beating all those other teams. That would be pure transformation. So, but because transformation is defined according to numbers, then possibly SA Rugby has actually failed in the targets it set for itself. But I'm going to say, look at the response from the general South African public to the 2023 victory, compared with 2019 and 2007 and 1995. How much more of this country's people were invested in that World Cup, took joy and satisfaction out of it, How many more young kids in the townships said, I'm Faf de Klerk, I'm pieter-steph de Toy? They didn't say I'm Bongi and Siya only. They were also saying, as little kids, as I'm playing the game, the mock games of rugby, they were also adopting personas of the white players, because it wasn't about the race. It was about who they were and what they represented. And that would be the transformation.
You mentioned earlier that Rassie only read one book in his life, but still, he's this amazing coach. So what do you think makes him so successful? Is it his people management? Is it his inbuilt strategic nous, if you want to call it that? What makes him such a special coach? We saw him chasing the sun, that he's not afraid of calling a spade a shovel, four-letter word in front of it. And then he seems to not also shy away from directly confronting high-profile players. For example, saying that Siya Kolisi is not the biggest thing in rugby in South Africa. South Africa is the biggest thing. And when he noticed that Eben and Dwayne Vermeulen and Siya were a bit at loggerheads, he sent him into a room like 3 small kids to go sort their rubbish out, or their problems out.
Yeah.
What makes him, from your experience, such a successful coach without having much of a really formal background, if I can call it that?
Well, one thing I can say, Mbia, is that none of his approach will have ever been gleaned from a book. He will never have picked up a book on leadership or team management and read it and gone, oh, okay, there's some principles. He wouldn't have studied some international leader and said, okay, how does that guy do it? I will do it similarly. So what we can definitely say is everything Rassie does is because it's intuitive from his own experience. It's never a learned experience. It's always a gut feel experience. So in terms of what makes him a good coach is that he was able to see patterns, is able to see patterns that few see. You see, I battled with this whole concept of the genius, that whenever I was telling people I'm doing this book, or in the build-up to it, or whatever it might be, inevitably somebody would say to me, oh, but Rassie's a genius. And I'd say, what does that mean? Why do you say he's a genius? Why wasn't Jake a genius? Why wasn't Kitch a genius? What makes him the genius? But it was never, I never got a satisfactory answer, because any of the skills that people said, well, that indicates the nature of his genius, were skills that other people had as well. So I tried asking him, and I got the predictable answer. He said, I'm not addressing that. That's windgat. If there's one thing that Rassie, well, there are 2 things that he absolutely hates. He hates embarrassment, and he hates windgat. He wants humility, and he demands it of his players as well. If he sees somebody becoming a prima donna, he slaps them down. It's because he went through that phase as well. When he was playing for the Cats, he felt entitled. He was top of his game. He was earning good money. He led a wild life of partying, a life of excess. And he realized the extent to which that damaged him. And so he knew that is the wrong way to do things. And that's why he'll discipline people on that whole windgat as soon as you think you're smarter or better than you are, bigger than you are. Then I went to Nick Mallet and said, what is this issue of the genius? And he says it's because Rassie can see things on a field that others don't. And it's not just this instinctive ability to look up and know where everybody on the field is, like Nas Botha was able to do. And there are a few players who have that innate ability. Antoine Dupont is probably one of the most critical examples you can get now, somebody who can look up and in an instant size up where everybody is. Rassie could do that. Where the penny dropped for me was he was talking about a game where he pulled off a particular move, and I said, oh, so you were 1 step ahead. And he said, no, John, I'm 10 steps ahead. Instead of running for the ball, he said, the problem when you watch TV is the camera's always on the ball. What you really want is an image further back, where you don't look where the ball is. You look where it's the off the ball stuff. So he would see where the ball is. Then he would be able to size up what the opposition was preparing to do. He would anticipate what they were going to do and where the ball would end up. And he would start moving to where the next point of contact, or even the point of contact 4 or 5 phases down the line, was going to be there. And when the ball got to that place, the player got man and ball. He got Rassie and the ball. And so it was that ability to immediately size up the way the patterns were evolving. And I couldn't help but think when he told me that, he said, it's like a game of chess. And that's when the penny fell very hard. And I just thought of one of those grand masters who can walk around the room and play 10 different games of chess and know exactly where all the pieces on the board are at any given time and win all 10 games. And those people are always considered to be maverick geniuses. And I thought, oh, that explains Rassie, this ability to know and anticipate and predict where things are going to happen. And that probably is his genius. But when it comes to his people management, it all stems from his own upbringing, the aversion to embarrassment, to make sure that people feel comfortable, to ensure that people know what's going on. So he'll never do one-on-one communications. It's always with the team. And he says it's because he doesn't want people going away gossiping if he sees Ox has gone off for a one-on-one meeting, and then the rest of the props are going, what the hell's going on there? What do we need to know? And the rumor mongering starts. He prefers to do it in front of everybody. My additional part to that is also, I feel that Rassie does it because he's also uncomfortable doing one-on-ones with people. He's more comfortable in the small group of players where he's comfortable talking to them as a group.
Like you talked about the genius thing now, and people often say that Rassie plays sort of a 3D chess. Now, I want to talk about those videos that he made, or the video that he made about Nic Berry, the ref against the Lions series that caused him to be banned, and also the comments that he made about the referees after the test that we lost against France. Wayne Barnes specifically got targeted a lot after that, and then World Rugby started really getting strict on it. And he was sort of made an example of it. Do you think Rassie really foresaw the consequences of those videos? He obviously, I think he denied that those videos were ever made for public consumption, number one. And secondly, I know he said, yeah, it's all on me, the comments he made about the refs, but that is quite unfortunate in the social media world that we live in today. People got death threats and families got death threats and the likes. Do you honestly think Rassie could have foreseen that? Or was it just, unfortunate?
I think he definitely didn't foresee it. When we had the conversation about the Nic Berry incident, it was a long conversation. And at the heart of it, I wanted to address the issue, the accusation that he had leaked it, which was actually a lot easier to deal with than I had anticipated, because I had access to all the documents that were made available at the disciplinary hearing, and the forensics of it were shown. And it's very clear. I also had Russell Belter, the videographer, whose Vimeo account was used for the distribution of the Nic Berry video. And he was able to talk me through the way in which he was able to see the path that the video had taken. Now, Rassie was reluctant to point fingers. So I then went and found somebody who would point a finger and expose where they lost control of the video. And that was Rassie Erasmus. And so that's why Frikkie is quoted in the book. And what happened was this: they identified, I think it's 5 people that Rassie wanted to send the video to. So those 5 people were given the video link that they could click on and watch the video. And with Vimeo, you can actually see in which city, not only which country, but which city that video has now been received and where it's being viewed. And when it's only 5 people, it's very simple. And because it was lockdown, they knew exactly where the various people would be watching that video. So it was the referees, Jacques Nienaber, the head of the referees, World Rugby's head of referees. Who else would have been there? Oh, it's been a while since I wrote the book, so I'm trying to remember. There was also people from SA Rugby, but it was a very small group of people. But they noticed that in Brisbane, the video had been received in Brisbane, and they looked and thought, but we haven't sent it to Brisbane. There's nobody in Brisbane who's received the video. And the video was accessed in Brisbane 20 minutes after Rassie had sent it out. So the video itself is 40 minutes long, just over 40 minutes. So somebody had sent it without having watched the whole video. And from Brisbane, so more people are starting to watch the video. So in Brisbane, it's starting to spread. And at that stage, they can't control it. They don't know then who these other people are. And if somebody, one of those people is the media, they don't know that. They have no way of finding out. But the question was then, why has it gone to Brisbane? And the answer is because Nic Berry's from Brisbane. And it turned out he had sent it to his agent because they had the email that he had sent to his agent. And it wasn't done through malice. It wasn't done with the motivation to embarrass Rassie or expose Rassie. Nic Berry sent it to his agent because that's who you would send it to control your business world, to know this is what's happening. I need to inform you. So I think Nic Berry sent it on with all the best intentions. And then it went mad. What you can't identify is who sent it to the media with the purposes of leaking it. That you will never know. But one thing for sure, Rassie didn't send it on to SuperSport, didn't send it on to News 24 or whoever broke it first, even though he threatened to do so. And the threat of doing it is what has tarred him with the brush, that it must have been him. Forensically, though, you can see that it wasn't. Circumstantially, however, it paints a different picture. I'm firmly of the belief, well, it's not even a belief, of the knowledge that Rassie didn't do it because the fallout was so terrible for him. It gave him genuine pain and anguish. He was genuinely emotionally disturbed by the impact that the leaked video ultimately had. And it goes to your earlier question about, did he anticipate it? The answer is absolutely not. He was devastated by it because he did not foresee what was about to explode. In the same way, and if I know when I've raised this issue before, people have said, countered it by saying he's not that naive. I'm going to say, actually, in this environment, he is. He's not this super god who knows everything. There is a lot that Rassie doesn't appreciate and understand. There is an element of naivety, and I'll give you one quick example about his naivety. It's a political naivety. When he appointed Siya Kolisi as the first black Springbok captain, he did so without any real appreciation of what he was actually doing. His motivation to pick Siya as the captain was that the previous captain was Eben Etzebeth, who was injured. Remember, this was only the second test match Rassie was picking as a Springbok coach. He picked a team to play Wales, and then he picked in Washington, then he picked the team to play England. In fact, he did it the other way around. The England team was the focus. So that's what he was concentrating on. And then he said, okay, well, now let's put a team together to play in Washington against Wales in what he called the moneymaker. He had no concerns about that particular game. He was focused on England, the hyper-focus. And so when he chose Siya as his captain, it was because he knew Siya from when Siya was 17 years old. He knew him as a captain of the Stormers. He knew him as a fabulous player. He knew that he wanted somebody who was close to the referee. So it would be the scrum half or a flank or a prop. Those were the positions that were close to the ref and could talk to the ref. And so he looked down his list and went, oh, Siya, I'll pick Siya. It was only when he gave that team list to Mark Alexander, then the president of SA Rugby, that the world exploded. And he had to actually go, what's going on here? And when I talked to him about it, it's a genuine sense of bewilderment that he had. He didn't have any hype. He didn't ever go, ha, I'm going to make history here. He was often accused of it. And it incenses him when people say, you played to your political paymasters. You chose a black captain because that was politically correct. The answer isn't. It isn't that. He chose the black captain. Well, he chose a captain. The fact that he was black was immaterial to the choice. So there is that naivety about that. There was a naivety about the fallout. And also that whole, the Wayne Barnes incident that you referred to, those videos and those comments he was making, they were done, Rassie shoots from the hip, almost naively from the hip. And when it was pointed out to him, but this is sarcasm, you're being sarcastic, you're saying something else, he would deny that but with a genuine bewilderment, because I don't think that Rassie's appreciation of sarcasm, of innuendo, is as sharp as other people's sense is. And it's countered, it's refuted, because Rassie is seen as somebody with far greater intellect. How can a man who has done all of those things not appreciate sarcasm? But the reality is, there are people who don't appreciate those things, whose brain doesn't work in exactly that same way as other people's brains. And Rassie is one of those people.
But he's, I hear that, but then I look at his tweets, and he would, I can't remember an example offhand now, but he would be very sarcastic in some tweets. I can't remember.
I'll give you an example.
Andre Esterhuizen. When he started, you started teaching the guys how to tackle the bag now, so that you can get away with what was it Owen Farrell got away with. Right. Yeah.
He said, yeah, exactly. So we must learn to tackle like that. So when I said to Rassie, but that's sarcastic, he goes, no, John, but that's what I meant. I meant if that's the way you tackle, we must tackle like that. Again, it's hard to swallow. And people are much more cynical. And there's part of our brains receiving that goes, we know what you're doing. You're being sarcastic. We see you. But he says, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being forthright. You take whichever version you want.
That's interesting. That's part of being an Afrikaans speaking person. Am I right? Especially when you're speaking English. It's not your home language. You might not maybe necessarily send the message that you're intending to send. Am I right?
Yeah. One thing that I found quite interesting is during the 2023 World Cup, and Rassie, he gave more news conferences than he was comfortable doing, I would imagine. And he was asked ahead of the Ireland game, was the 7-1 split a possibility? And he said, yeah, it's a possibility. And the articles that were then written was, Rassie's playing mind games with the Irish. He wasn't playing mind games. He was asked if it was a possibility. He said it was a possibility, and then they did it. It was pretty straightforward, actually. But people chose to read innuendo and nuance and all elements built into it. Actually, the first thing to do with Rassie when he says something is take it on face value, and then and understand it like that. Then apply all your other whatever filters into the situation. But he said 7-1 split. Yep, it's a possibility. He wasn't playing mind games because they were considering it, and then they did it.
You know what? Something I learned now from attending press conferences and the likes, and I don't write articles or anything or make comments about press conferences. I just publish them. And I sit in the same press conferences that the other guys do, the other journalists, are not mentioning names here. And then I read the articles they write about that press conference. And I have to bend my mind, because how on earth can they write that, from this thing that I was there myself. I know what they said. But what's being written is not really, they sort of really bend the truth, if I can call it that, not break it. But I can't believe the gymnastics they go through to extract something of value from a press conference. And I can understand someone like Rassie, maybe stepping into that bit of a minefield, if I can call it that, especially with his bluntness. It might end up biting him a bit there. It's interesting.
Yeah, he's overly blunt. And people try to read innuendo where innuendo doesn't exist. And I'm saying, if you want to actually understand Rassie, take it on face value, because genuinely or generally, that is actually the way to interpret things.
You mentioned earlier that Rassie, when he said he doesn't really want to watch a game on TV because the camera's on the ball all the time. There's a lot more to be seen, and the way that they anticipate moves and work out things. A big part of that attention to detail and success is a team that Rassie built around him. Most notably, Jacques Nienaber, but also, as we saw now in Chasing the Sun, Felix Jones. Now, both Felix Jones and Jacques Nienaber are no longer with the Springboks. He's got a whole new team in there. He's sort of taken a bit of a step back from his overall responsibility as director of rugby. He's now only the head coach, which he was, in fact, in everything but name, I think. How much do you think Rassie not working with Jacques specifically after a 20-year partnership where they're almost like David and Jonathan? How much is that going to affect him? Do you think it's going to play a role, or do you think he'll rise above it?
I think it is going to be an adjustment for him, because they did so much together. You consider they go back to the Moby unit when Rassie was the general manager at SA Rugby, and he assembled a group of people, a mobile training unit. It was him, Jacques, Sean Roux, Peter de Villiers, the former French prop, not the former Springbok coach, Peter, and they would travel the country, and they were like, I mean, Europe, the right age to remember a TV show called The A-Team, where it was a group of former mercenaries who would travel around and go to hot spots and sort out the trouble. And they would be parachuted in, and the Moby team was like that. And so Rassie and Jacques built up that very, very strong chemistry all those years ago. Then they were working together on the World Cup in 2015. No, 2007, I beg your pardon. They were there for a very brief period before they realized it wasn't a long-term thing for them. There were many elements where, or situations, and then Munster together and then back together with the Springboks. So it is going to leave a huge void, and I don't know how quickly Rassie will strike up the same kind of relationship with, well, certainly with Jerry Flannery. He knows Jerry Flannery from the days of Munster. So I don't think that that's going to be too difficult for him to do. But also consider he's still got quite a core around him. Mzwandele's stick is still there. Don Human is still there. And Mzwandele's stick is actually such a critical part of that teamwork, of that fabric, because he's the off-the-ball coach. I don't know how many other teams have an off-the-ball coach, but that's what Rassie wants. It's not about where the ball is, it's where what else is happening. And my understanding is that it was Stocker, as they call him, Mzwandele Stick, who first came up with the idea of taking the scrum off the mark and instead of taking the free kick, the famous Damien Willemse incident. It's always attributed to Rassie because it's maverick out-the-box thinking. But my understanding was that Stocker was the one who came up with that. But he will have trouble, I would imagine, just for himself to settle into the rhythm of having new people around him.
Well, you mentioned earlier in the conversation that he's got very, very few friends around him, and not even close friends, just friends in general. And I think Jacques was almost, they were almost one. They were that close. And I think that psychological loss almost of someone like that. And I got the impression that Jacques wanted to stand on his own 2 feet, that he felt he lived a bit in Rassie's shadow, and not in a bad way, but he wanted to prove himself a little bit. How would Rassie, on a personal level, cope with that kind of a loss, if you had to speculate?
I couldn't tell you, Mbia. I would only imagine that it's going to leave a void, but it's also a void that Rassie will fill as quickly as he can, and he'll establish a new relationship with the new guys coming in. And because he knows Jerry, it's going to be probably a little bit easier than with others. But you're absolutely right about Jacques. I think Jacques would have known that the longer he's with Rassie, the more it's the Ras Naber situation, where he's not his own person. And Jacques Nienaber is a phenomenal thinker of the game, intuitive ability to understand rugby. There is no need for him to have Rassie with him all the time. He will and can be a very successful person by himself. And for him, going to Ireland is so critical, because he in the book, when I interviewed him, we have a section where he talks about going to Munster and the difficulty to decide on coming back. In fact, his wife and his kids said no, they wanted to stay there. They were there for the long haul. Jacques wanted the opportunity to get the Irish passport, which would open up the European Union to him in terms of opportunity. And it wasn't too much of a surprise for me when he decided to go to Leinster, because it seemed to me that that was the unfulfilled business that he now needed to complete. So I see what Jacques is doing. Understandably, he's saying, I need to stand up on my own 2 feet. I need to establish my own identity, and I need to create further opportunity for myself, which is what he's doing.
You published a book before the World Cup last year, What was Rassie's mindset going towards that World Cup, if I may ask that? Specifically in terms of expectation. You know, we won the World Cup in 2019 when we never expected to win it. The plan was always to look at 2023 as the year to win the Cup. Won it in 2019. That put a lot of pressure on everyone involved. Do you think Rassie how was he gearing up for that, for the World Cup last year?
And yeah, I'm smiling because it was one of the first things when we're sitting down and I'm setting up my recording equipment, and then just in light banter, I said to him, "So Rassie, are we going to win the World Cup this year?" And he said, 100%, chum, 100%. And I said, "My goodness, you are so confident." He goes, yeah, no, we'll win it, no problem. And he didn't deviate from that. When they were flying out, where there was a big send-off ceremony, a black tie affair at the Sandton Convention Center. MTN put on a big splash for them, and I was doing a Q&A on stage with Jacques and with Siya, and Rassie came and sat with me and my wife. He knew her. She was very involved with the box. She worked at that time for MTN, and he was in and out of our house while we were working on the book. And so he sat between us because he just didn't want to be amongst the hurly-burly of everybody in the room and people coming up and asking for selfies. So I said to him, "You're obviously very confident." And he for the first time, he went, I don't know if I should have been that confident. I said, "Don't worry. We didn't put it in the book. It's fine. But I'll tell you now that he was very confident of winning the World Cup." And that was January 2023. And the World Cup was obviously in the October. But he knew what he wanted to do. He knew how it was going to play out. But what he obviously couldn't have anticipated was the injury to Malcolm Marx and the need to call Andre Pollard to the team. When I spoke to him back in January and then worked in February, it didn't look like Pollard would have recovered in time for the World Cup. So he already had planned a World Cup without Andre Pollard. And even when Pollard probably would have been fit enough, he was probably as fit as Siya was at the time of picking the team, he still didn't pick Andre Pollard because he had planned for a World Cup without Andre Pollard, but he hadn't planned for a World Cup without Siya Kolisi. Do you remember that period where they played Test rugby? It would have been the Rugby Championship, and Siya obviously was still injured, couldn't play. Rassie said to me then, he said, "My God, we miss that guy. You can't believe what he brings to the team. It's not just in terms of what he brings on the field, it's what he brings to the team dynamic." He said, "We really miss this guy." And he knew that Siya was a critical part of his team. In the book, you'll see, I think we were about to go to the printers, and I was saying, "Can we just hold up? I just want to include a line or two about Siya." And I think the line that we managed to get in before the publisher said, "You cannot write anything more," was something like, "Even if he's 70% fit, I'm still taking him to the World Cup." That's how dedicated he was to the importance of Siya. But then obviously the way things worked out, Malcolm Marx got injured, opening came up, Marnie's kicking wasn't as reliable as they would have liked, and they could afford to bring in Andre Pollard. So there was, again, a lot of obstacles going forward, but in the early stages of that year, he was very confident.
Last question, that relationship between Rassie and Siya. How genuine is that? Is that a proper relationship, or how can you describe that?
Yeah, it's very. I don't know if things went awry during the World Cup, because I haven't had a chance to talk to Rassie properly since the book came out and he was involved in the World Cup. We've exchanged WhatsApps and voice notes and things like that, but nothing in depth. We were going to work on an update to the book, which didn't transpire. Rassie, he didn't have a good start to the year, and so we've shelved that. And I've had to move on to other projects as well. My time ran away with me. But the relationship from the start, when Siya was young, is a genuine one. They knew he had been identified as this young player. In fact, Rassie was horrified to find that Siya had signed for Free State, and he dispatched Rassie Erasmus, his lawyer, to go and sort it out, because he felt that there was a technicality in the contract which resulted in them being able to make the contract null and void. and they got Siya back again to the Western Province, and Rassie watched him, helped him develop through the Western Province Academy. And so it's a very strong bond that they established. I don't know the extent to which, I mean, I take it from Chasing the Sun, where I realized things were going a little wrong when there was the dispute with Siya and Eben and Dwayne. And I don't know the impact that that had on Rassie. I just don't know.
Yeah, Rassie said this. He didn't do all of this to win the cup or stand on the podium and hold the cup aloft. He's always in the background there. You never even almost see him. But what he was living for was that moment when you return to the airport, and that the people were just absolutely crazy about the team coming back, and that kind of the way that the Rugby united the nation and everything else. That's why he was doing this. Am I right? It's not doing it for the sake of rugby so much. He actually does understand to a degree the importance of his role and the importance of the role of the Springboks in uniting a fairly divided country.
Well, absolutely. It's at the heart of what he does. When I said to Rassie, winning the 2019 World Cup, holding that cup, because we've got a photograph of him holding the trophy, I said, that must have been the greatest moment of your life. And without a moment's hesitation, he shot me down. No chum, not at all. He said, I'm so surprised that photograph even exists. He said, I held that trophy like that for a split second because they told me to hold the trophy like that. He said, I didn't want to hold the trophy like that. When you look at the photographs of the team celebrating, where's Rassie? Way at the back. He doesn't want to be at the front. I said, then what? If it's not that, what is the great achievement? He said, the Elite Players Development Pathway, the EPD, his transformation program, that gives him the greatest joy. And he got quite emotional talking about it as well. He said it was watching those guys with smiles on their faces scoring those tries. He's referring there to Lekanyo and Makazole Mapimpi. He's referring to Cheslin Colby. He says it was watching them scoring those tries and the ease with which they scored their tries. That gave him the greatest joy, because he knew where they had come from. He knew what they had been through. He knew what it meant for the country. So all of it was encapsulated in those moments and those guys. And then he lists the other players. We've got the list in the book of the players who came through the Elite Players Development Pathway. I often say, because Rassie is this shy man who doesn't like small talk and easy conversation, if you're caught in a lift that breaks down and now you've got to chat to Rassie Erasmus, here's how to break the ice. Say to him, Rassie, tell me about the EPD, the Elite Players Development Pathway, and he will talk to you for hours, because that is his baby, and that is what he's most proud of, that he's got right. And when he talks to the players and he says, you are playing for the people of Sweden, and he points to Siya, and he knows the villages that the players came from, he makes it personal about them. He says the All Blacks, they don't have these personal things and difficulties in their life that we have. We've got more of the responsibility, so we play for bigger ideals. It's not about winning the World Cup and holding the World Cup aloft. It's playing for those bigger ideals. And the over-emotional state that he was in, I think he was absolutely exhausted when he came back. He looked to me like a man who was almost in pain when he got off the plane and he saw that crowd. But there would have also been a deep sense of emotion and satisfaction that he achieved what he wanted to have achieved. But yeah, his ability to transform and understand what it means for the people of South Africa runs thick in his veins.
I would have been able to talk to you for another hour or so, but yeah, time is now caught up with us. David, I really appreciate this, man. This is an awesome interview. Thank you.
And it's been my absolute pleasure, and I love chatting to somebody as knowledgeable as you are. And I hope I've been able to make a contribution. Thank you so much for inviting me.